Vamos. Bom, então, bom dia a todos, boa tarde. Né? Nós temos a apresentação hoje da professora Victoria Rodner, o sugestivo nome, então, de My Love Affair with Ground Theory. Infelizmente, na semana passada não seria a apresentação, mas tivemos que transferir, então, não perdendo a oportunidade, e rapidamente passando a palavra, então já agradecemos a participação, e nós temos aí em torno de 1 hora. Tá bem? Então, obrigado por isso.
Então, se eu puder falar em inglês, eu me sinto mais confortável, mas qualquer pergunta, se quer parar, fazer uma pergunta em português, eu consigo. Só que vai ficar um pouco mais bonito, não em portunhol, mas no meu inglês. Então, this is my presentation on grounded theory, take 2. No? Last week didn't materialize. I'm very sorry about that. Back again. So it is a suggestive title talking about my love affair with grounded theory, because it is really a methodology that I think evokes a lot of passion. Julia invited me to give this presentation on methodology, and I took the opportunity, thinking also of a possible publication that's coming up in a special issue on grounded theory. So the second part of my title is how to make this passion work, because a lot of people can have that love affair, but actually having a long-term successful relationship is more difficult and more challenging. So the reason for it is that grounded theory can sound very sexy, but actually in practice can be very, very challenging. So how can we get over those challenges? And how can you use grounded theory in the real world, meaning academia, which is anything but real, right? So that's why I put in this real world of how can we make grounded theory work for our publications and for our research. I'll come back. So grounded theory means different things for different people. So just from the onset, it is confusing for many. It is a research process as well as a research result. Okay? Some of it see it as a full methodological package, or some people use just aspects of grounded theory in their analysis. For example, I've done this. I have to sort of come to a compromise when I use my methodology, in that I've used maybe grounded theory coding. Okay, so rather than saying that my research is fully grounded theory, I can say, well, I have used certain aspects of analysis of it. Okay. Is it working?
Is it on the device?
I don't mind coming.
Yeah,
it is?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So it can be a method, a technique, a methodology. Okay, so there's a difference between methodology and method. No, I don't know what stages you're at or what's your purpose of being here. If you're members of faculty, if you're doctoral students, master's students, where in research are you? Are you thinking of adopting a new type of research? So why grounded theory? Why does it interest you? No? So method is the how-to. Methodology is this more sort of encompassing aspect of it. It can be just a technique, paradigm, or as one of the founding fathers of grounded theory, Barney Glaser, it's a research paradigm of discovery. Well, that's really sexy, you know, to talk about you discovering things. And you're really, it's grounded, your findings are grounded in the data, your data. So it's a very appealing package, you know? But how to make it actually work can be a bit more challenging. On qualitative research more broadly, Eileen Fisher from Schulich Business School in Canada recently has this paper out, which is basically an interview with Eileen Fisher on how to do qualitative research, okay, in consumption, market, and culture. It gives us these dikas, right? These suggestions. Read, and then read and continue reading, read a bit more, you know. You're never done with your reading. And read really globally, not only reading around your academic field, read around method, read beyond your academic field, which can be very tiring, if not disheartening. She talks about context-driven rather than theory-driven approach. Larger, richer databases are here to stay, big databases. Even in qualitative, so that means a lot of ethnography, a lot of interviews, and an aspect of what she says here, a lot of papers start with that puzzling over the real world phenomena or context. So like, where do you start? Well, you see something, you live through something which you find is interesting. And so you want to delve into that area a bit more and find, make it your research context. Okay, so going into those puzzling phenomena means you have to go in with a particular framework. And how are you going to go into that phenomena? How are you going to write about it? How are you going to research it? How are you going to produce some contribution at the end? No? And so this is where maybe a lot of myself as a doctoral student a few years back, I found this, you're lost, this paradigm's lost. How do I start to think about my context will really shape the rest of my research output. And I think this is something, if I could give any suggestion to doctoral students, is to really define what paradigm defines you best. Like, find out how do you see the world, and you will probably stay within that paradigm. So this is a book by Egon Guba, The Paradigm Dialogue, which someone recommended to me, and I thought that was the bedrock of me defining who I am as a researcher. And beyond research of that real world of academia, how do I see the world? No? So Guba, and then with his wife, Ivana Lincoln, that you probably recognize this book of Denson and Lincoln that have several editions of this qualitative research. So Guba and Lincoln looked at how things are, the underpinning of your research. It's the underpinning of you as a researcher. What is your ontological underpinning? Your epistemological underpinning, yeah? And then your methodological one. And this story, if you think of it for a PhD, if that's the journey that you're on, you have to keep that story from beginning to end. Publications, it's a shorter story, but for PhD 1, you really have to think how you're looking at the world and at this context. So this will really define you as a researcher, and I think it defines you as a person. So going through Guba's publication, which is now a bit dated, no, it's from 1990, but I think it's a really great place to start. And he divides it into positivism first. He gives you a bit of background. What is positivism? No? So I look at positivism and I started to think, is this what defines me? Ontologically, it's a realist framework. No? Reality is out there. I have to go and find it. No? Context free. You make these generalizations that can be applicable anywhere. It is an objectivist epistemology. So the human, we try to avoid human contamination. No? We don't want that personal involvement in our research and in our research output, because that's going to be seen as something that's irrelevant and extra scientific. So positivism, the origins of positivism really come from the natural sciences, applied sciences, and how they get applied to the social sciences. So we're going to treat humans the same way as we would treat anything in biology, math, physics, and chemistry. No? And the method is experimental. It's manipulative. No? You want to keep your conditions in a kind of sterile environment. Okay, so I started reading about positivism, and I thought, oh my God, this is not going to work. This is definitely not my lover of this PhD. And in the PhD, you have to go in with a lot of love. So, okay, that guy was the start. The next one that Guba suggests is critical theory. And so again, it gets a bit closer with critical theory. It's this critical realist approach to the ontology. It's trying to react against positivism and looking for this need for human sciences rather than applied sciences to unpack our understanding of social phenomena. So the epistemology is subjectivist, but everything is kind of in this larger frame, nearly this meta frame of neo-Marxism, feminism, neoliberalism, materialism. There are these larger frameworks that are defining how we see the world. And in fact, it's pretty impossible for us to ever break out of that framework because we are conditioned by it as people, no? So, okay, I thought it was getting a bit closer, but really not quite. I did not feel like I could engage in a long-term relationship with this guy either. And then the last one that Guba suggests is constructivism. And constructivism is really positioned at the polar end from positivism. It's a relativist ontology. Realities exist only as multiple constructions. Everything is contextual, no? There's a breakaway from grand theory. You have the subjectivist epistemology, and the inquirer, the researcher, it co-constructs that reality that's being made. And you take into account the realities of many stakeholders, no longer that human contamination, but rather that's the methodology is hermeneutic, dialectic. So you're co-constructing your research as you go along. I found my man. This is where I'm going to stick. I absolutely love it. This talks to me as a researcher, and in fact, it talked to me as a person. Yes, I do believe that things are relative. I think our worlds are created in our minds. I really believe in the sort of maybe there's a sociological aspect of me, you know, as a researcher. So let's go further with this love affair with constructivism as this paradigm. So going a bit deeper into constructionism, we see that this universe doesn't really exist out there. We are not only observers, we are participating in making our realities, no? Realities, Guba says, they only exist in the context of the mental framework of how you think about it. Okay? Knowledge is the outcome of human activity and human construction of that reality. Okay? And it's ever changing. So that idea of it being in flux, I thought was also really appropriate, not only for my research context, but my research style. It has this idea of making meaning together. Yeah? That human beings are constantly constructing their social world. We never come into the world into something that we're completely blank. No, there's a world that existed before us, so we have to come into that whole framework. We understand ourselves as social units within our context. And then constructivism in particular, people, institutions, and interactions are involved in producing their realities and making meaning, making sense of their realities. No? Something that a person has or doesn't have, but it's something that people do together. Okay, so this all really worked for me as a researcher, and which led me then to, maybe some of you are familiar with this piece by Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann, the social construction of reality, which is kind of a bedrock of some of you in the field of management. And the whole sort of lineage of institutional theory, organizational studies, they go back to Berger and Luckmann a lot, in the sense that Berger and Luckmann feel that human beings create and sustain, they institutionalize realities, and they make these realities that are actually social constructions into factual things. No? They externalize, they objectivate, and then they internalize things. So if you're in that field of org studies, institutional theory, Berger and Luckmann, this is a key first book now to have, at least in your library, because it's kind of this origin of acceptance that we create these concepts and then we follow them as taken for granted truths, when in fact all they are socially created realities, perceptions. Huh? Truth is historically, culturally, and contextually sensitive. Going on a bit more with Berger and Luckmann, that we're never interacting in this kind of vacuum, but we're always embedded and drawn and broader in institutional context. And this idea of embeddedness is a big concept within the field of institutional theory and institutional studies. They refer to social realities as symbolic universes. No, it's not a reality out there. It's not a universe out there, but it's just a symbolic universe. And they see that as something conceived as a matrix of all socially objectivated, subjectively real meaning. Entire society and entire biography of the individual are seen as taking place within this universe. So things only make sense within a particular universe. So how does that come into practice for my field? So I finished my PhD about 3 years ago now. So for my PhD, which was focusing on the art market, and I developed this term of the art machine as a mechanism of value generation, value creation in the art market. And so for my PhD, I looked at how this art mechanism is socially constructed by a network of art professionals that work in institutions, and they are definers of reality. Okay? These art professionals, curators, museum directors, academics, fine art teachers, they confer value, symbolic and financial value, onto artworks, onto artists, within their particular world, no? Within something that's called the art world. That all makes sense if you're part of the art world. So if you go to the Sao Paulo Biennale 1 year, you might think, oh my God, I could do that. You know, what on earth is this doing hanging up in the Biennale, and why does it cost 2 million reais? No? Well, okay, it makes sense within that symbolic universe because of these definers of reality. Outside of that universe, it maybe doesn't make any sense. Especially it's interesting in the field of art, where the value cannot be weighed in the actual material objects. No? It's a very created, it's a very constructed concept of value. Okay, so post-PhD, because there is life after the PhD, it's only the troublesome beginning, no? Trying to translate that finding for journal publication. And I currently have a paper under, it's a revise and resubmit with the Academy of Management Journal, which looks at government disruption and emergence of an institutional niche. So I'm trying to use what I found in my PhD and adapt it to this more managerial concepts. So government disruption, because my context was the Venezuelan art market. And in Venezuela, there has been some significant macro level forces that have shifted the way things operate. They have shifted industry in the country, including the art industry. So I look at sort of Venezuela under Chavez and how did that affect the art market. So it looks at the institutional work carried out by art professionals, which now we have to call agents, because this is what the journal's talking about. These are agents, and how they circumvent macro level disruptions to their art world, to their symbolic universe. And create, in a kind of entrepreneurial way, an alternative field. No? So it's bringing in this terminology that was there. It was in the context. It's finding it. It's in the ground of that data. But now I have to talk with these guys and talk in their language. And yes, it all makes sense. No? And it's a theoretical contribution that can be adapted to a specific audience. So if all goes well, that will come to the actual publication. In constructionism, they talk about a touch test. That really, this is if you're really basing your contribution on your data cannot talk on its own. And if you say, well, my data is X, Y, Z, you need the analytical aspect as a researcher, no? And it would be lazy or just a bit, I don't know, sort of overestimating what your data can do for you. If you say, well, my data just said this. You have to take your raw data and do that theoretical leap until it becomes theory. So Saldana has this kind of codes to theory model, how you can fit all of these masses of codes that you have found in your particular context, making them real to abstract. So the touch test, this is the template, this is what I actually produced for my thesis. I haven't included all of this in any of my publications, but aspects of it I have, because it's a way, diagramming your data is a way to help your reader into your context. It not only justifies why you get to this side of the diagram, of how you get to that theory and that theme, but also, you know your data inside out, but your reader will not, and you will not be able to give your reader all of the details of your data. So doing these sort of illustrations in contexts that are very data rich, like a lot of grounded theory ones are, helps you to make it more concise. So the touch test is, for example, what Saldana said. If some of your codes, let's say, is about mothers, well, it's something like it's tangible, I can touch it. So the first little step you can take is make that more abstract. We're talking about motherhood rather than mothers. So motherhood, I can't, maternidade, right? I cannot touch motherhood. It is more of a concept. So it's making those first steps. And it's something that when I've spoken to my PhD brothers and sisters, it's a hard step to make, that theoretical leap from your raw codes to some more abstracted concepts. Another way of doing this, and this is the thematic timeline I have in the AMJ article, is sort of doing this timeline to give my reader the whole story. These arrows at the top is how I've divided the findings. And these are kind of subdivisions of the findings. So they could read through it in a linear way, but maybe they've kind of lost track of like, how does it all make sense as a big story? So doing this thematic timeline helps me tell on one single page, and rather a small condensed part of that page, how through history, Venezuela's recent history of the last maybe 20 years, what changes have happened, who implemented those changes, and what other aspects came in. So it's a helpful way for you as qualitative researchers, if that's what you are, to really guide your reader through your data in an illustrative manner. Okay. Quotes are important. You're speaking, most of you probably are doing interviews as part of your research. So there's this idea of proof quotes and power quotes. Proof quotes are the ones that really hold the, so from, according to Pratt, Michael Pratt, he's I think he was one of the editors at AMJ. Proof quotes, power quotes are the most compelling bits of your data, the ones that really illustrate your points, and they should be in the body of your data. Okay, this is my power quote. I'm going to use my words that are sacred. I have limited amount of words, and I'm going to use this because it really illustrates what I want to say. Okay, this is my power one. From my participants, I'm going to show you why my data matters. Why is it leading me to this theoretical contribution? However, you cannot include what everyone said in all your interviews in your research. It's impossible. No? But you maybe already said somewhere in your paper that this is part of a larger research. I interviewed 32 people, but I only have power quotes of 5. But what happened to all those other people? Why are their voices being muted? Was their story not important? No, well, their story's in another paper. But you can't say that, because anyone that's going to publish your paper, they want the best part of your story. So offer them the depth of your story, and you can take it into these proof quotes, extra quotes in a data table, and you can condense things. Maybe it's even an appendix. Okay, so what these people, these are all quotes from my participants. This is the theme. If I go back to that, it's this arrow. Okay, so I'm leaving is that one, polarizing ideologies. These are proof quotes to back up this power quote, to back up what I'm saying. If the reader wants more verbatim evidence that this is a thing, you can go here, and I'm not detracting from my words. Okay, so I've even quantified it here. So go to table 4, look at this one and this one and this one and this one. If you don't believe me, go look at those. Look at all the stuff I've done. It's all here. But I'm only going to show you the most compelling one. Okay, so that's a way to try to bring your rich data into a realistic package. Because if not, it would be impossible in a sense. And this is not something that I did for my PhD because I had plenty of words to work with there, but it's something that maybe you'd have to consider for a publication where you have a limited amount of words, okay? And you have to back it up with all the literature review and the methodology and your findings and your discussion. You're really constrained, but you can paint quite a convincing picture that way. Okay, one of the aspects of constructivism that really goes into grounded theory is that aspect of the passionate participant. Okay, that I felt very identified with this. So before, let's say in a positivist standpoint, to have any credible research, you would need to stand out of time and context. You need to stand out of yourself as a person, as a researcher. You're supposed to have this kind of voice of nowhere, right? Maybe you even talk about yourself in the third person. The researcher found this. The research team argued that. And it's kind of thinking of that human contamination. That was that bias, like, oh, so if you're a human being in here, you're going to come in with all your own baggage, and you're going to taint this this research. However, for constructivism, for grounded theory, the researcher is this important human instrument. Okay, you cannot step out of your own humanity. That's ridiculous. No? We are in the social sciences, so we are social beings. And we actually, it's more beneficial if we locate ourselves within those empirical realities, dive in as an ethnographer into your field to try to understand it better. We are not passive receptacles into which data is poured. And so nobody comes into any world untouched. No? We've already been molded by some form or another. And there's that idea of co-production between the researcher and the researched. And data, as I was saying before, does not speak for itself. It needs your analytical mind. It needs your own context to give it some shape and to take it into a research project. So talking in the first person narrative is a key aspect of this method or this framework. So I thought, well, yes, that makes total sense. I had read other PhDs, so while I was doing mine, and some of them did talk in the third person. And I felt just doesn't go with me. I cannot write 100,000 words talking in the third person. I am part of this whole research process, and I really love this aspect of being a participant of the research. I think now I lost it, no? Okay. So, as well as being a participant, you can be a non-participant or a participant in your observation, okay? And this is a big difference, okay? So, for instance, doing interviews in a kind of sterile environment or interviews in situ, so you're taking in a lot more of this person's world than in the sterile environment. As well as doing the interview, which is Kabbalah says it's this method of situating yourself into that human context, and it's a method of telling stories. Now, I really like that idea that interviewing is telling the story, the participant's story, and their reality. As well as doing interviews, you might have some of this, taking photographs of your environment. So you also have to think, is my photographing, what is it? Is it just illustrative photography, or is it visual methods? And there's a whole other field of visual methods. How is that photograph or that video that's part of your research feeding into your analysis, and how is it feeding into your findings? So don't say, I did visual methods when all you did was put 3 photographs in your article. They're just illustrating your context. So it's being quite detailed of like how you explain your methodology. So that's all fine and dandy, and this is exactly kind of what I did for my PhD. Interviewing, non-participant observation, and illustrative photography. And you really have to fess up. It was non-participant. I interviewed gallery owners, museum directors, government officials, but I can't say that I participated in that. Maybe I went to a gallery opening, but that's just non-participant observation. I'm looking at that context. However, with my new research, which is into religion and spiritual consumption here in Brazil, I have taken that step into being a participant observer. And I am going and consuming all of these different faiths as a follower of these faiths. So go to the, Julio knows, I go to the Pentecostal churches. I don't just sit with my arms crossed like this. I'm in, give me all the blessing you can give me. I will take it. You know? We do the prayers, we do everything. We go to spiritual centers. We get this sort of this blessing, this energy healing all around us. We go to going into Afro-Brazilian faiths of Umbanda and Candomblé, get a consulta with some of these mais and pais de santo. They tell me what's coming, and then I can do my buzios, and they can tell me about my future or my astral context. And maybe lastly, the full immersion would be a full baptism within an evangelical church. I'm really delving in as a passionate participant in my context, okay? I am consuming what is on offer. And so my research output now will take a different approach to what my PhD taught me. With interviewing, I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to interviewing. So I do my interviews. I sometimes do my own transcriptions. This is a picture from my PhD. I did my own transcriptions manually, and I did my own coding manually. It's a human coding rather than program coding. And then I developed a spreadsheet with all the codes, and then from coding I did my memo writing. There are a lot of great programs out to do coding. I have no idea what they're like. I haven't delved into them yet. However, there's, from grounded theory, there is that kind of idea of you really knowing your data. And you know your data if you read through all of that excerpt of the interview. No? If I type in a word, maybe for my new one, magic, or healing for my new one, into faith, well, I can maybe pick up the words where healing is and I can read around it. But maybe there's some aspects there, if I listen to the person when they're talking about this, and maybe they're using a different word. Maybe they're making an emphasis. Maybe they're shouting with excitement. There's aspects of really knowing your data. You're going to produce, in my opinion, sort of richer findings. And if you really know your data, you can probably milk your data for multiple publications, okay? So some aspects would be good for that paper and some aspects for another one. So yeah, that's my style in interviewing. Now, I've moved on to being that participant observer, and with this participation in the new field, you can see someone you know up there at the top, doing some field work with me. I've started to make field notes, and quite detailed field notes at that. So every time I go to a culto or a service, I write up field notes afterwards. And these field notes is what Holbrook calls subjective personal introspections. It's like auto-ethnography. So you're the ethnographer. How did you experience that service? How did you feel after that culto? What were your preconceptions before going into that service? What did I know about evangelism before going in? What did I know about Afro-Brazilian faith before going in? So writing these field notes, I become the consumer, and I quantify already how many hours I spent in each one. So then I can say I've spent 20 hours doing field work in this particular phase. I've spent 50 hours doing field work in that one. And that quantification can help in writing up. And already while I'm writing these notes, I can highlight where there's some themes that are important. Here, I think these are maybe concepts that are going to be coming in positive psychology, the aspect of agency of those objects. And for example, this is talking about like my fear going into this particular field. And this one is even comparing the TOS as the Temple of Solomon, which is one of the Pentecostal churches. I'm comparing my Umbanda experience with Pentecostalism already. So I'm bridging already as I write, sort of connecting those nodes. That is going to help me to then write up the findings. So Kathy Sharmas is a constructivist grounded theorist. Okay, and grounded theory as constructivism puts a lot of focus on codes. Your codes are going to be the skeleton of your analysis. Okay, it's not only an analytic frame; it's your whole basis is going to become from your codes. Okay, so grounded theorists, they use different styles. I mean, that's the thing. You have to read quite broadly, because some people like Kathy Sharmas will do initial coding and second level coding. Other people do initial coding, focus coding. Glaser and Strauss talked about open coding, axial coding, selective coding. I mean, these are different how-to ways of doing your coding. But what is clear is that coding is crucial to then take you into this memo writing. Okay? A memo writing is that step from your data collection and writing your papers. And it's from your codes that you start putting that story together. And memo writing should be really exciting, no? It should be quite free. Whatever comes to you in that time. Glaser, he was one of the founders of grounded theory. Then in 1978, he went off and wrote his own book. He says that memo writing is this core stage of generating theory from that raw data of codes. It's how you start to put that story together. Okay? If you go directly from coding to writing, you are not doing grounded theory. Memos are the theorizing write-up of those codes, and it's where you start to see that relationship between codes and categories. Memos lead to abstraction. And ideation. Okay, so this is Kathy Sharmas. I'm a total groupie. I don't think of that sound, but her work in constructing grounded theory is very clear and very helpful for any researcher in qualitative studies. So she suggests writing memos quickly without editing. Don't worry about what you're writing. Okay. Keep your natural voice, because that's probably the most authentic one that you will have. You're thinking and feeling like a human being, not like a pedantic social scientist, okay? So it's taking a step back and really enjoying that memo writing, and it's going to be very engaging. From your memos, you can then write your papers. So if we look at constructivism and constructive grounded theory, these are their daddies of grounded theory, right? We've got Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss, that they, in this book, The Discovery of Grounded Theory, presented this method or paradigm, okay? They call it Strategies for Qualitative Research when it came out in 1967. They are considered the classic grounded theorists in that sense, whereas Kathy Sharmas is a constructivist grounded theorist. So generally, grounded theory is grounded in the context, okay? It's that aspect of data is where your theory is going to come from. It's trying to bridge that gap from theory and empirical research and moving away from forcing pet ideas onto data. So this might seem like something that's a bit far-fetched, but it happens a lot. And if anyone's quite familiar with the Journal of Consumer Research, there's a lot of adoption of pet ideas in consumer research. So I'm going to take a Bourdieuan idea or that idea from Georg Simmel about negative reciprocity, and that explains my consumer behavior context. Done. So that means, yeah, it requires a lot of work that consumer cultural theorists have to read into sociology, into anthropology, into psychology. I mean, this is going well beyond their field of marketing. But it could be just kind of, it's not grounded theory because it's taking theory from other fields and explaining your consumer culture theory. So discovery came as the outcome of this book. So Barney Glaser went to work with Ansel Strauss, and they did this study of awareness of dying. Very cheery book. So it's 1965, and they were doing a study in hospitals of how people behave differently depending on their awareness if they were dying or not. How nurses treated patients, how the patients treated their family members if they knew within the next month or 2 months, I am going to die. Or did they have an idea that I'm here for forever, eventually I'm coming out of the hospital. So this was their context. And from this context, they thought, hey, going into really deep into this context, we managed to bring completely new theories out of it. And they developed the discovery of grounded theory. However, unfortunately, Glaser and Strauss had a big breakup. Their love affair did not work out. And then within a few years, they went their own ways. In the sense that Glaser kept on supporting quite an open approach to data collection, data analysis. And Strauss developed a later book with Juliet Corbin, which had like sort of coding templates in a sense. So they broke up. Ansel Strauss already passed away. Barney Glaser is still around. But in a sense that if you're going to use grounded theory as your method, you can't just say, discovery, done. I've done grounded theory because I cited discovery. You should actually say, well, I'm using a Glaserian method, or I'm adopting a Straussian method. Because discovery, in fact, which I would recommend to everyone, but it's really an introduction to that method. It's not a how-to. It's not enough by any means. And it's a lot of the follow-up material that's come afterwards, like Glaser's theoretical sensitivity of 1978, which tells you how to use this method. So if you're going to really propose grounded theory, you have to take one of these sides. It's not enough for you to say, I use grounded theory, done. One book in the bag. Your paper will probably get rejected by any journal that is familiar with the field. So, for example, how does this work in practice? The theoretical sensitivity. It's a skill and an ability of the researcher. Okay? It's kind of like a researcher's self-awareness when they come into the field, and how their own position affects the research process. Okay? So you become, as a researcher, part of the process, and the researcher and the researched are part of the story. So, for example, if we're going to do a study on smoking, you could go into the field with this question. What coping strategies do smokers use when they're confronted with the stigma of social restrictions on smoking? Okay, this is not a grounded theory approach, because you've already come in with a lot of preconceptions. One, that coping strategies is that this is something bad, that the smoker wants to get away from this. How do they cope with this as a problem in their lives? No? That there's a social stigma of smokers. And how can they overcome these? So if you were to do a grounded theory method on smoking, you're not going to look at it as being problematic, stigmatizing, or that's something that smokers have to cope with. Maybe you go in with this more open mind, and maybe you look at the pleasures of smoking, the social connections that are made through smoking, the historical background of why that person smokes or not. So it leaves you more open to dig up some richer maybe findings from that data. So we're to see the sort of pillars of grounded theory. It's really about that emergence, that you have to remain open to the empirical environment, no? And from that empirical environment, you're going to pull up some fresh theory. You have this aspect of theoretical sampling, which Glaser and Strauss argues that you go in, you do data collection, you code, you analyze, and then you start coding and analyzing at the same time, in the sense you're doing this constant comparison. While you're doing this, you see if you're coding and analyzing while you're data collecting, you're like, hey, I think this is going to be more rich and informative. Let's go, and who are we going to interview next? It's not a random sampling, what you do in grounded theory, but it's rather this theoretical sampling of where is the data guiding you for something that will be interesting. So the concepts that you're building out are really these blocks that are going to make up your theory. Let's see how we're doing with time. So going in with this open mind doesn't mean that you go in completely brain dead, no, or like nothing in your sort of to build up on, no. So you're going to not really focus on what's interesting for you, but what can be of interest found in that area. New discoveries are always higher risk, no? Because you're going into this unknown territory. But an open mind does not mean an empty head. Of course it doesn't, especially now for academics that you're reading all the time, as Eileen Fisher said, read, 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 and read some more. However, Jean-Paul Sartre, maybe he took this idea from Spider-Man. Doesn't he say something about responsibility? Okay, well, Sartre said with freedom comes responsibility. No? So you have a lot of freedom if you adopt the grounded theory as approach, but you also have a lot of responsibility of what it is you're going to produce. You're not just piggybacking on someone else's theory. There's a very nice paper by Roy Sotheby in the Academy of Management Journal that is entitled What Grounded Theory Is Not. And he's kind of demystifying some aspects of grounded theory. So grounded theory does not mean that you ignore literature, no? You will have to do a literature review. You have to know a bit of the context before you go in. But since it's an iterative process, maybe you're going to have to rewrite your literature after, or you're going to have to look into other fields afterwards. But it doesn't mean that you have zero literature, no? Grounded theory is not about testing content analysis and word counts. Just because it's really wordy and looks kind of like ethnography, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be grounded theory. Grounded theory is not perfect, no? So having to justify it in your research is something important. And just saying you did grounded theory because it sounds sexy is not sufficient. Grounded theory is not presentation of raw data. So your data does not speak for itself. Your raw data has to have that theoretical leap that you make as a researcher and bring that contribution to it. And also deciding what data to use. You're going to be choosing what data is coming up as interesting in your field. Do some theoretical sampling, but also when you actually produce that paper, you're going to have to think of which data do I use as my power quotes, which data can be proof quotes, and which data just cannot make it, that gets the cut. No? Grounded theory is not applying formulaic technique to data. No? Grounded theory is not easy, and grounded theory is not, this one maybe most importantly, is not an absence of a methodology section. I did grounded theory, done. I think as qualitative researchers, you have to justify your method a lot more than quantitative researchers. You have to do these graphs to walk your reader through it. You have to really explain to a lot more detail why you did what you did, why is it of value. And most definitely it's not detracting any kind of methodology section, especially if you think that there's schools of thought from grounded theory. So having just Glaser and Strauss is not gonna buy it, you know. Grounded theory is this generation of theory rather than verification, so it's inductive in nature. So deductive work is that you have the hypothesis, you deduce consequences, and then you're going to falsify or validate that hypothesis. Induction is that you have this idea, you collect data, you analyze it, you find some hypotheses. But in grounded theory, you analyze and generate more concepts where maybe there's an evolving theory, so you have to go back and do some more data collection. There's quite a lot of movement. So this is an image from my thesis, and so this is my findings section, 3 chapters of my findings sections, and this is my literature review, which, being iterative in that sense, inductive, I had to rewrite my whole literature review after I had gone into the field and after I had done my coding, and after I'd done some more data collection, more coding. I was like, that first literature review, which was what, 21 to 56, quite a few amount of pages and a lot of, you know, pain, sweat, and tears. I had to rewrite it completely because it no longer made sense. It was not telling my story that my data was telling me. So I'm not going to force this onto my data if I want to take that kind of grounded theorist approach. Milking your data is what Glaser is talking about, the theoretical saturation, or that sense of completeness. And this is really important, like when to stop. Nobody knows. How many interviews do I need to do? I don't know, maybe 20, maybe 40, maybe 60, maybe 8, probably not enough, but there's no magical number. But when you're doing your data collection and you're lifting these concepts out of the raw data and you're building towards a theory, you're going to find when you do some more data collection that this is just getting repeated, feeling quite complete. Sharma says the data no longer sparked the theoretical aspects. And this is really key for the grounded theory method. So it's letting your data tell you when to stop, no, rather than you making it stop. Okay, so let's see, it's value-based your findings, and here, this is Michael Pratt again in AMJ. There's this idea of making that mistake by showing too much data and too little interpretation. Again, your data doesn't talk for itself, and it's really your analytical interpretation of it. So just doing like, I did 150 interviews, but if 120 of them are meaningless, then you did not listen to that theoretical saturation. You did not have that theoretical sensitivity. To kind of finish up, I'm conscious of the time. I did a review a few years ago for a journal called Symbolic Interaction of Guba and Lincoln's latest book, actually published after his death. It was published in 2013. So she published it, and it's from their work they used to do together in California. And another book which I highly recommend by Gibson and Hartman, Rediscovering Grounded Theory. Okay, so if you're really interested in this is a very helpful global perspective of grounded theory and how to use it. Okay, so I thought, oh, these are my granddaddies. This is how my passion started in this whole paradigm of constructivism. This is going to be brilliant, the constructivist credo. And actually, I gave it a really negative review. I was a bit scared that maybe Yvonne Lincoln will hate me forever if I ever got to meet her at a conference. But it really did not live up to what their previous work had done. And it was really a bit of a letdown. But okay, to wrap up, my relationship with grounded theory and with this constructivist paradigm altogether is like how you go from the lust to the love. And so I love this method. I love this idea of this paradigm. And I think it allows me as a researcher within this field, but I'm in the field of marketing, it allows me to be that kind of sociologist, ethnographer that maybe I always wanted to be. It allows me to go deep into the data, to be part of that passionate participant. But how do you make it work? There's some keys, there's some things that you might have to leave out. Maybe you have to be really specific. And when you're publishing your work, you might have to say, I used axial coding, for example, as my coding analysis. And then you will use all those references. So yes, people know that axial coding is part of grounded theory. But I don't go in saying, I am a pure grounded theorist. All of this is grounded theorist, because you might get rejected. People might say, well, that's a big word to use. No? So there might be a bit of that. If you want to use it as sort of a long-term relationship, which I'm sure I'm going to have a long-term relationship with grounded theory and constructivist grounded theory particularly, it's knowing how to present it to different audiences and knowing how to share my research journey with my audience in a convincing way. So maybe I have to call my paper inductive or qualitative, but I can say, well, actually, I'm diagramming data. I'm using these proof quotes and power quotes. I did participant observation. I went into the field. I did subjective personal, and explaining the methods that I use to keep that methodology, that paradigm that I think has shaped me as a researcher for the long term, rather than for the quick fling. No? And just lastly, my slide here, I think the most important thing is, if you want to do good work, is to really love what you do. And I think going into research, you have to really enjoy it, enjoy the context, make the most out of it. And I think having a strong research paradigm helps to have that pleasant trip of it. Thank you very much for coming. And well, if you have any questions, do let me know.
Tempo para duas perguntas.
Consegui convencer alguém para adotar a ficar assim como com medo do paradigma.
O que eu tenho observado nos qualitativos é que realmente eles nunca falam que utilizam ground theory puramente, né? Geralmente são as técnicas, algumas técnicas, eles fazem um mix com outras abordagens já conhecidas do campo, né?
Sim.
Então parece ser muito... você tem que conhecer bem o seu campo para ver a forma como vai citar no journal. Seria isso?
Sim, conhecer o campo e também qual dessas fases, porque se grounded theory é tudo isso, não? É um método, paradigma, metodologia, uma técnica específica para analisar os códigos, etc, etc. Justificar isso. E depende também do público, não? E, por exemplo, talvez em alguns journals do marketing, daria para mencionar quase, eu fiz grounded Glaser Strauss, suficiente, mas se você entra nessa área do Organization Studies, do Institutional Theory, esses journals que são mais para o management, que eles conhecem mais a fundo, que eles estão seguindo o trabalho do Berger e Lugman do início, então eles falariam, não, olha, não, você não fez isso, só explica um pouco melhor o método que você fez, justifica no método, mas não vem falar que você fez essa pesquisa puramente etnográfica, grounded theory, não? Porque tem até alguns papers que saem, eu fiz grounded theory, aqui eu tenho 3 hipóteses que eu vou testar. Não, uma incongruência, não faz sentido falar assim. Essa pessoa não tem nem ideia do que é grounded theory, mas só é um conceito que é atraente, não? Parece uma coisa bem global, parece você ser um pesquisador bem a fundo, mais etnográfico no sentido. Mas não faz sentido você falar, eu fiz grounded e tem as 3 hipóteses que eu vou testar no campo. Isso não é assim. E fazer uma pesquisa grounded é uma coisa a largo prazo, não? Demora muito tempo. Então, eu acho que pensar no público e justificar. E eu já fiz isso para esse journal do AMJ. Então, eu usei coding analysis que é do Greger. Justifiquei nesse sentido, porque era um coding analysis que faz sentido. Sim.
Outra questão? Os professores quase que a mão.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My question is, I do like the way the grounded theory codes the data, and to me it feels more like a technique, to me. How do you see grounded theory versus content analysis in this way? I mean, in the way they analyze that.
I've never used content analysis or discourse analysis. I haven't used it yet. I think grounded theory is maybe going in to that field more openly, maybe. I'm not entirely sure how it would differ to content analysis, but I think content analysis has that maybe more constructivist aspect of it, the structuralist of where analyzing this data, this maybe written material, searching for certain aspects, and grounded theory is really going nearly blank slate into the field and find it. But I haven't applied content analysis to my research yet. I'm not very familiar with the technique. Is it something that you've been using or trying applying to your own research?
Well, the thing is, I usually use content analysis, but I feel it's quite close to. So I'm reading a bit more about grounded theory because I feel both methods can like help each other. And one thing that you mentioned that really struck me was that the idea that when you go with an open mind to the field, you don't have to have an empty head, which usually was my preconcept against grounded theory, that I mean no one can ever go to the field without having preconceptions of the field itself.
Yeah.
And so in this way, I think they are even closer, because I mean you have to read before you go to the field. You have some lenses to organize your data beforehand. So that's why I still can't get about grounded theory.
I mean, maybe for content analysis, it could be a technique of how you then code from the how you maybe use axle coding, which is having a core code, and then from that core code, you have a lot of different subcategories. So maybe applying grounded theory to a content analysis is that technique, or did you go in with a specific research objective going into that analysis of discourse analysis, for instance? No one can go in open mind, but I think the example of, let's say, the smoking example of like, oh, I'm going to go in finding like what are the social impact of smokers because they're rejected by society and they have to smoke outside. You come in with a lot of baggage in that sense. Instead of just sort of sitting down and hanging out with smokers, like, why do you smoke? Tell me about smoking. What does smoking mean to you? And then let them, maybe they'll come up with like, oh, the social, I'm a pariah, no one wants to sit with me, my wife keeps nagging me to stop, and I have to stand outside, I can't sit and go in the restaurant, or whatever it is, if you have these smoking bans. So I think that's a nice example of how it can be more grounded if you go in kind of more ethnographic style. Tell me about smoking. So, for example, with the religion study now, I'm not Brazilian. No, I am unfamiliar with the historical aspect of Brazil's religious makeup. No, Afro-Brazilian religions are new to me. Spirit possession is new to me. I'm not an evangelist. I've come in kind of open that maybe I don't have some preconceptions that some Brazilian researchers would have searching their own field. So I've come in, but tell me about your faith. What does religion mean to you? Instead of saying like, why are Pentecostals always after your money? Like, how much money do you give to the church? So that would be a more loaded question. So I think it's that taking that step back and being more open to things. And for my PhD, for example, I did not have a political question in my interview guide. I wanted to see, I'm Venezuelan originally. So I went into Venezuela to do something different. Like, okay, I'll go into a market that in the arts marketing, not many people talk about Venezuela. I'll go into Venezuela. I didn't have any questions like, how has the art market changed since Hugo Chavez came into government? Or what is your political view? Or how has the socialist government impacted industry? Nothing of that. But it came out. It was vomited out by all my interview participants. They could not talk about their reality of working in Venezuela without talking about the political framework, although it was not one of my questions. So my thesis became really about macro level pressures, government forces changing industry. It changed. Completely, it changed. Because I listened to the data and I kind of I was like, right, I cannot ignore the fact that Venezuela's been through this political shift because it's shaped everything else. And I think it's being sensitive in that sense. They talk about theoretical sensitivity. And I think it's important to read broadly. You read Glazer and Strauss. I would recommend reading The Construction of Social Reality. Read broadly around method, because once you have a strong method, it will stay with you. And I remember speaking to some of my PhD brothers, when I was doing my doctorate. They're like, I don't get it. I don't get the method. Just explain, what's the method? I was like, I've spent several months, you have to read it, you have to become a philosopher in that sense. And so like, how does your methodology shape everything else? And I think once you have a strong methodology, it will probably stay with you forever. And all of the rest of your work will have a strong ground. Then it's like, oh, here's a method, I'll just, done, did it. Well, it probably won't fit. It won't tell a very convincing story. And then when it goes to review to top tier journals, it's not going to get in. So there's that. You have to become like this philosopher and take that step back and read broadly, like how you think of the world, how the world is shaped. What are truths? Are truths objectivated? Are they fixed truths? Or are they relative truths? But that doesn't answer anything for content analysis, but well.
No, that's great, thank you.
Ok, Vitória, thank you.
Muito obrigada pela oportunidade.